How many times in worship ministry have you heard the word excellence? We are aiming for excellence in our worship. Or I think I said in a video several weeks ago that the goal is undistracting excellence. And I tried to put a bit of a modifier on the word excellence. There are a lot of people who talk about excellence, but I don't think that we've gotten a good definition of what excellence is, and therefore we haven't been able to answer the question, is excellence in our worship ministry actually the goal? Because some people take it to an extreme and they say worship ministry is all about the heart. Not many people do just that, but I'm just taking it to the extremes here. They say it's all about the heart. Some people say it is just about excellence and doing things as well as we possibly can, but I don't think that we even have a definition of what excellence is. So in this video, I want to define what excellence in worship ministry means and therefore determine whether it should be our goal or not. Now, where should we start whenever we want to define a word? Well, we want to go to the Bible. And the word excellence is used in the New Testament, but I want to point out that I don't think that this is the excellence that ultimately that we're talking about. So we can't just say, where does it talk about excellence in the Bible, and then go to the Bible. But I think it does shed some light on a few things. So let's first go to one of the places where it's used, and that's in Philippians 4:8. It says this, you know this. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So it's used there, but before we define the word excellence, let's look at 2 Peter 1, starting in verse 3. It's used here as well. It says, His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of Him who called us to His own glory and excellence, by which He has granted to us His precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. For this reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, which is also the same word that is used for excellence. So virtue and excellence, same word. And excellence, or virtue, with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, self-control with steadfastness, steadfastness with godliness, godliness with brotherly affection with love. For if these qualities, one of those being excellence or virtue, are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So there we have two uses of the word excellence. That word excellence, there's other sort of mentions of excellence in the New Testament, but it's not used that many times. These are two of the main places where the word excellence is used. But here's what I want us to notice. I want us to notice that we can't just take these, because it would be really easy to take 2 Peter 1 and say, well, Peter said, if these qualities are yours and are increasing, one of those is excellence, then you won't be ineffective or unfruitful, and therefore we should be increasingly excellent because we don't want to be ineffective or unfruitful in our ministry to Christ. Here's what I want us to realize, though, is that those words for excellence aren't talking, I don't think, about the same excellence that most people are talking about when they talk about excellence in their worship ministry. These words for excellence are talking about moral uprightness. And whenever you see that word excellent in the New Testament or the Old Testament, such as God is excellent or His excellence, it's more so talking about moral uprightness. And I don't think that that's the excellence that most people are talking about when we're having this conversation about excellence in worship ministry. That being said, moral uprightness comes before the excellence that we're actually talking about. If you don't have moral uprightness, setting a good example for the people in your church, then you shouldn't be on the worship team anyway. So in a sense, yes, that sort of excellence is probably the most important excellence when it comes to being on the worship team. And by the way, if you want to see how to communicate that to your worship team members, I've got my worship team toolkit linked down in the description below. In that, you will find my code of conduct, which would touch on the moral excellence. Remember, we aren't morally upright because it saves us, but moral uprightness is evidence of the work of the Spirit in our life. And as leaders in the church, we are held to a higher standard. So there is sort of a code of conduct that we need to live up to, and that's what I've got down in the description below. So if you want to see the code of conduct I use in my worship ministry, check out that down in the description below. But all that to say, that's not the excellence that most people are talking about when they talk about excellence in worship ministry. Ultimately, what they're talking about is musical skill. When you think of excellence in the context of your worship ministry, usually you're talking about musical skill. How good does someone need to be, or is musical skill playing our instrument as good as we possibly can, excellently? Should that be the goal in our worship ministry. And I would propose this explanation of excellence for our conversation today because it's the definition that we find in the dictionary, which is how we talk in modern times. We use excellence to mean the quality of being outstanding or extremely good. Is that what we're aiming for in our worship ministry? Excellence, the quality of being outstanding or extremely good. And if we look at that definition, then I think what we find is that this definition, the quality of being outstanding or extremely good, that definition implies a standard that someone must meet to be considered excellent. If you want to say that somebody is excellent in their musicianship, in this case, in worship ministry, then it means that they have the quality of being outstanding or extremely good, which means that there is some standard that they're trying to live up to, some standard that they need to meet to be considered excellent. And here's really what I think the crux of the debate is when it comes to people having conversations about excellence in worship ministry. This is where people disagree. I think there are a couple questions that come up when we talk about excellence. First of all, what is the criteria of the standard of excellence? We've determined if you're going to say somebody's extremely good or outstanding at something, that means that they have surpassed some bar that reveals to you that they are extremely good or outstanding, and that means that there is a criteria for the standard. So the question is, what are we measuring to see if we're excellent? What is the criteria? But the other thing that I've heard often in this conversation is this question of, is that criteria subjective and internal, meaning that it is different for different people and really you're just measuring it against yourself, i.e., am I better than I was last week? Or is that criteria objective and external, meaning that it exists outside of you? You aren't measuring it against yourself, but you are measuring it against a standard that exists outside of you, that everybody is held to that same standard. And I think that oftentimes when we talk about excellence in worship ministry, that's where the main debate is happening. Because a lot of people will be like, yes, we're striving for excellence, but excellence is really just doing better than you did last week. While other people, even though I don't know if they would come out as bluntly and put it this way, they're thinking in their mind, this person isn't excellent because there are criteria that they need to meet, not just did they do better than they did yesterday, but there is objective external criteria that they need to meet that proves to me that they are playing excellently. And so my goal in this video is to answer those two questions. First of all, is the criteria internal and subjective, meaning we measure against ourselves, or is it objective and external, meaning there's some expectation that exists outside of ourselves, some criteria that exists outside of ourselves that we need to measure up to. And then once we answer whether it is something in ourselves or something outside of ourselves, we're going to answer the question, what is that criteria? And then ultimately, I guess we're going to ask, is excellence what we're aiming for? So let's start with, is it subjective and internal or objective and external? And I would propose to you that there is an objective external standard that worship team members need to live up to if they are to be excellent. And I come to that conclusion for a few reasons. First of all, let me put it this way. Let's say somebody comes up to you and they have a really good heart, because that's what we often hear when we let people who aren't quite as musically skilled as we'd like onto the worship team. If they have a really good heart, but they're not musical at all, like they can't sing on pitch or they're horrible at their instrument, would you still allow them to join the musical worship team? I would think for most of us the answer would be no. I think we have a hard time saying it, but ultimately we know that this person shouldn't be on the worship team. Why? Well, if the criteria that we're measuring for excellence is simply, you should do better than you did last week, that's what it means to be excellent. Then that means to be on the worship team, all this person needs to do is they don't need to sound good, they don't need to play their instrument right, they just need to be making incremental improvements every week, and then we can say that they're being excellent. But you know that that's not true. You know if somebody's going to be excellent, then, and maybe it's not even excellence at this point, but we know that to join the worship team, there should be some standard that people meet. They should be able to sing on pitch. They should be able to sing in time, play in time. They should know how to play certain guitar chords. We already know instinctively, and we all act this way, that there are external criteria that people need to live up to be on the musical worship team. And so all of us, hopefully, are holding people to some baseline of expectation that exists outside of the person themselves. So our expectations for worship team members are not internal, at least not in terms of them joining the worship team or not. And if excellence is the goal of the worship team, then it can't be internal, because then there's no standard that we're holding people to except that they're simply better than what they were yesterday. There's already an objective external expectation that we hold people to determine whether they should be on the worship team. And if the goal is to be excellent on the worship team, then that goal of being excellent is probably external as well. And I also want to touch on why I think people do this, where they say, well, excellence is just doing better than you did yesterday. And I think it revolves around a deeper discussion about, is perfection the goal? And I always hear people say, well, perfection isn't the goal for the worship team because we'll never have everything right. But I would argue that by the same token, we land at the same place if we use excellence as our goal, because most people then define excellence as doing as good as you possibly can. What is perfection? Perfection is getting everything 100% right. We can't do that. But excellence is doing as good as you possibly can. And I don't know about you, but I've been leading worship for 20 years now. I still feel like there's room for improvement. I don't think that I do as good as I possibly can every single Sunday. Why? Because I know that there's an objective external standard that I'm trying to live up to that exists outside of my personal skill and personal talent that I can't live up to, and I'm not going to live up to it. And so if excellence is defined as doing as good as I possibly can, I'm sorry, I don't think I do as good as I possibly can. I'm not a perfect person. It's just the same conversation. We're just calling it something different. Every time that I lead worship, there are probably, if I think about it, probably at least 7 things I could have improved. I could have sang that note less flat. I could have played my guitar more in time. I missed a chord, something like that. And so I will always be disappointed if I'm trying to be excellent and excellence is doing as good as I possibly can, because I don't feel like I always do as good as I possibly can, even though I want to. I make mistakes from time to time, and there is always room for improvement. So that leads me to the conclusion that if we have a standard for excellence, that standard is external and objective. It is something that exists outside of ourselves, and it is something that we are all measured up to, because that's what we all do anyways. We can act like it's subjective and, oh, he did better than he did last week, but we know where we want somebody to be excellent. There's an objective standard that we're trying to hold people to. So let's define that objective standard. And let's go back to the Old Testament. People love to compare worship teams to the priests in the temple. Sometimes I think we do that to our detriment, because we aren't serving in the same way that priests in the temple serve. But obviously we can learn things from that time in history. So let's go to Exodus 31, and I want you to hear about some people who were chosen to work on the tabernacle, specifically talking about artistic design here. This is verse 1 through 6 in Exodus 31. It says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God.'" What does that mean? "With ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed with him Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, and I have given to all able men ability, that they may make all that I have commanded you." And what I want us to see here is that the Spirit of God was given to these people for a specific purpose, i.e., they were given gifts by the Spirit. When they were given gifts by that Spirit to serve, in this case, the temple, but I think likewise when we are given gifts to serve the church, what does that mean? How do we recognize that? Well, we recognize that we've been filled with the Spirit of God, and what I'm referring to here is spiritual gifts. When we've been given spiritual gifts, we know that we have those spiritual gifts because we do them with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship. In other words, we have all the skill that we need to do what God has called us to do. And I think we can all agree that if we are gifted, if we have been given a skill by the Holy Spirit to use, then it means that we will be good at that thing. Maybe not even better than average, but we will be skilled at that thing. What does it say? When Bezalel was filled with the Spirit, he got ability and intelligence, knowledge and all craftsmanship to devise artistic designs. So when the Spirit gifts you, he will give you the skill to do the things that he calls you and enables you to do. But ultimately, I think this passage also defines what excellence actually means. Because when these people were filled with the Spirit of God to serve in the temple, it wasn't an arbitrary thing. Here is the objective external criteria that we hold people to for excellence. Verse 6, I have given to all able men ability. How do we test that ability? That they may make all that I have commanded you. Did you catch that? God gave them the ability. How do we know that they had that ability through the Spirit? Because they were able to do all that God had commanded them to do. And that's what it meant to be excellent. Imagine if these men were tasked to devise artistic designs to work in gold, silver, and bronze, and cutting stones for setting and in carving wood, and instead, I don't know, they started making impressive sand sculptures out in Israel. Or maybe they started cooking really good food, right? You wouldn't say that they were excellent in their job because they're not doing the things that God has called them to do. So we know that we are excellent when we are fulfilling the commands of God. And so when it comes to excellence, God is the one who gets to define excellence. And how do we know that something is excellent? It's because we are fulfilling the commands of God. I would propose that excellence in worship ministry is an accomplishment of God's commands. And so the question, of course, becomes, what are God's commands for music in our worship services? Remember, I want to delineate that we're specifically talking about worship ministry here, that is music within our corporate worship gatherings, all right? Excellence in music outside of our corporate gatherings, I think, can look different, but we need to understand God's purpose and commandments for music in our corporate worship gatherings if we are going to be excellent, because excellence is accomplishing God's commands for music in our worship gatherings. That's what it means to be excellent. So what are those commands? And this is, of course, based off of Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms, hymns, spiritual songs to one another with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Talk about it all the time on my channel. What is the purpose of music in our corporate worship gatherings? I'll state that again, in our corporate worship gatherings, not writ large in the world. The purpose is to allow believers to sing to one another. That's what God commands us to do. When we sing to one another, we are teaching and admonishing one another. So our music, if it's going to be excellent, needs to allow us to teach and admonish one another. I'll break that down here more in a second. And ultimately, it's going to glorify God. We do it with thankfulness in our hearts to God. We do it to bring him glory. So let's break down those three things. First of all, if our music is to be excellent, then that music should be designed to allow us to sing to one another. And when I speak of that, I'm speaking of congregational worship. Whenever Colossians 3:16 talks about singing to one another, it's not one person singing to one person or one person singing to the church. It is everyone singing together. And so if we are to follow God's commands for music in our worship gatherings, when we get together to sing, and mind you, this is a limitation on what many of us would consider musical excellence. The songs that we sing should enable everyone to sing to one another. And that actually means that there is probably a limitation on what most people would consider musical excellence. A lot of people consider musical excellence playing music as good as they possibly can, making it as interesting as they possibly can. Let me ask you this. I'll put it in concrete terms here. What's more excellent? What's more impressive? Somebody who can sing an octave, or somebody like Mariah Carey who can sing, what can she sing, 5 octaves or something crazy? What's more excellent? What's more impressive? Probably the person who has a large range. But I think that this criteria actually tamps down on that, because our ultimate goal is not simply to be musically excellent. It's not simply to be as impressive musically as we possibly can be. Our goal is to fulfill the commandments of God. One of those commandments is to be able to sing to one another. That means that we have guidelines that we now need to work within if we want to be excellent. You can sing like a crazy range and a bunch of syncopation and scoops and dips. That doesn't mean that you're being excellent in your corporate worship gatherings because you aren't fulfilling the commandment that God has given to use music that enables us to sing to one another. So that's the first criteria of excellence. The second criteria of excellence is that our songs would be able to teach and admonish one another. And I think a practical application of that in relation to musical excellence, what most people would consider musical excellence, would be around this topic of lyrics. How interesting do we want to get with our lyrics? Because If I'm listening to a song for personal use, I often want a song to be artistic, and I want to have to think about it, and I want it to, I don't know, like sometimes I enjoy songs where I don't even really understand what the artist is saying because they're using imagery that's like, oh, that's kind of poetic and moody, but it's not very clear. But if our songs in our corporate gathering are meant to teach and admonish one another, then they must be clear. And by the way, I'm about to balance all of this out here in a second with the third point, but these are fundamental to our understanding of excellence as well. Our songs should be clear. We should choose clarity over artistry if we have to choose between the two. Like I said, I'm going to balance that out here in a second. But we should choose clarity over artistry because God commands that the songs that we sing are designed to teach and admonish one another, meaning that there must be doctrine in the song that people can understand. So that's the second criteria of excellence. The third criteria is, and this is where we get to what everybody cares about, the third criteria is that our songs, our musicianship, would glorify God. And one of the ways we do that is through our skill. And when I talk of skill this time, I am talking about your ability to play complex things. I'm talking about your ability to do interesting things in the music, so on and so forth. But I think that excellence, which is what most people are talking about when they talk about excellence in worship ministry, or they say, I'm bored of modern worship music because it's not very interesting or it's not very excellent. Most people are talking about musical skill, but I want you to understand that there are two criteria that work alongside. I won't even say they take precedence over, although they might take precedence over it, but I don't know if I want to go that far or not. But they at least work alongside musical excellence. But the musical excellence must serve within the confines of, what did we say? Number one, that believers must be able to sing to one another. That means we can't do everything, or at least we shouldn't do everything that we want to do vocally, at least, because people won't be able to sing along with us. And the goal whenever we gather together is for everybody to sing together. Same thing with playing. If you're playing intricate parts that confuse people, it might be musically interesting, but it will not serve to allow people to sing to one another. Same thing with lyrics, like I already talked about. We might have musically interesting lyrics, but our songs are designed to teach and admonish one another, so we should focus on clarity over artistry. But then, within those confines, we use our musicianship to bring glory to God by, I guess we're back to the question, what is the objective standard? But I've conveniently run out of time in this video, but I think that that's the crux of this discussion. What is excellence? Excellence is accomplishing God's commandments and bringing glory to Him by doing it in an outstanding, extremely good way, measured against an objective standard. So, should we aim for excellence in our worship ministry? Yes, but excellence defined the way that God defines it. If you want some help communicating those expectations to your worship team, check out the Worship Team Toolkit. I'll link that down in the description below. In that, I will give you my free code of conduct that I give to all new worship team members, also the application form I have new worship team members fill out when they first want to join my team. And in that, you will see the expectations spiritually, logistically, and musically that I have for my worship team. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship excellently.